I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
When we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
Foundations of society are fragile. We must be the shepherds of our own civilization.
Anyone answers either yes or no without making necessary distinctions, both are not telling the truth. They're lying.
Father, we pray that your word will become a hammer that breaks rocks into pieces. That you will raise up in this nation pulpits and prophets that will call the nation back to repentance.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah initiative, conversation without compromise.
Cliff is this guy who's been to Turkmenistan 30 times for business, adopted a Turkmen as a son, and had like a whole family of Christian Turkmens living with him. Mm-hmm. And then, 8 days after that, when I'm working on this room, there's this guy comes past in a truck and says, "Hey, you want help with that? $100. I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take it." Mm-hmm. And as he's working, he says, "Keep talking. What part of England is your accent from?" I said, "Northampton." And he said, "You know what? Immigrants are the heart and soul of this country. My ex-wife was an immigrant from
Turkmenistan."
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So it's just been this crazy streak. I go through different seasons. Right now it's Saudis I'm meeting everywhere.
Oh, wow.
So with the same level of kind of craziness, but it's like I go through, it's like this kind of work leads me, is like TV shows. Like I have a season of working with Turkmens, then there's like a season finale and cliffhangers, then something else starts, and then like a year later it all kind of picks up again. It's really strange.
Oh my God, wow. There's like so much diversity on this show. I mean, I bet you're like meeting a bunch of people and seeing the different ethnic groups that are around Seattle too. I mean, right now with me, especially with the Turkic people, I'm starting to meet more Turkmens and then more Kyrgyz, for instance, and then more Uighurs as we're having more Uighur protests and events around in the area. It's really diverse.
Yeah, it is. So I think so far we've had, I haven't even counted this, but we've had Turkmenistan, at least four Turkmens on the show so far, actually.
Oh my God, 4?
Yeah. One, we've had Iranians, we've had Afghanis, we've had Saudis, we've had a ton of Iraqis, Bangladesh, had a Polish guy. Yeah, Turkmens are probably my largest demographic of guests, actually.
Really? Have you had any Turks?
No, you'd be the first.
I'm the first. Wow, I'm the first. Yay!
Yeah, we've talked about Turkey before, but generally, it's actually really hard to get people to come and talk about their own culture's politics.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's really controversial, especially with Turkey. You can't really find a lot of Turkish people who will openly speak out against Turkey. I mean, especially with the dictatorship and stuff, they can hold a lot of it against you. I'm not afraid to talk about it because as an opinion columnist at my school's newspaper, I've written so many opinionated articles upon Erdogan, his leadership within Turkey, and the detaining of innocent Turks. And it's just a really scary topic. I mean, not a lot of people can speak up against it, but it's kind of just like speaking up for it and then realizing the consequences after. For me, yes, there can be consequences, but I think about the consequences of the afterlife rather than in the real world. So I'd rather speak up for it now than be questioned for it in the afterlife. Right.
And even in the real world, doing nothing has consequences as well.
Of course.
And it may not seem immediate, but you've got to have a long view of these things as well. Mm-hmm. So the world you want to live in does not happen until just keeping your mouth shut until everyone who you don't like is dead, because that will never happen.
Yeah. But definitely, I mean, it's just really... I just always remember Martin Luther King Jr. and how he says that you'll remember more of the silence of your friends than the words of your enemies. And that's true.
Yeah. So the kind of breakdown of how I want to go through this today is I want to do this in sort of 5 sort of sections.
Of course.
And it's a vague outline. It always is. Mm-hmm. But the first thing is kind of who are the Uighurs, and I'm not. I heard you pronounce it, and I realized I'm not going to get there.
No, you're fine.
And we'll kind of go through what's happening in China currently. The why of what's happening in China, because something we care about on this show is it's one thing to kind of present the facts, which we do want to do, but we really want to understand the worldview and what people use to sort of justify their positions. Then we're going to talk about the practical things to do, and then we're going to talk about the worldview change that's needed through that. And I'm sure we'll have different opinions on that, and that's part of the fun.
Yes, most definitely. All right. So should we start off with who are the Uighurs?
Yes.
Yeah, so the way you pronounced it, Uyghurs, is a way that a lot of people pronounce it. Even the Uyghur scholars that I'm in contact with pronounce it as Uyghurs. So there's definitely two ways to pronounce it. Uyghurs is just the way that I pronounce it because I'm in the Turkish language or in the Turkic language. That's just the way that it's pronounced. But Uyghurs is also a correct term to identify them. And so basically, the Uyghurs are one of the first known Turkic-speaking ethnic groups within the whole entire world. They live in an area called East Turkestan. The Chinese Communist Party has now relabeled that to Xinjiang, and Xinjiang means new province, new territory in Chinese. And so right now they are occupied within that area. There are over 1 million Chinese concentration camps, according to BBC, Vox, The Guardian, The Washington Post, many news outlets. But yeah, so they're one of the main known Turkic ethnic groups, and they're very special to this world. And I don't want to think of them as going extinct, but it is getting to that point right now. But other than that, they have a very long history. They haven't mixed as much, I believe. Like with the Turks, they've mixed a lot more than any other Turkic group, I would say, considering the Ottoman Empire and then the fall and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. But with the Uyghurs, I believe they did a lot less mixing, and they stay close within their culture, and they're just preoccupied right now, and there's not much to learn about their culture through a foreigner's aspect due to the Chinese Communist Party's shutdown of them.
Right. And so that history starts with what? Sort of the Turkic peoples have a sort of steppe tribal history originally, right?
Yes, a very long tribal-like history. So we can go back to, we can look at the Turkic nations right now. So Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkey, and then we either call it Uyghuristan. Not a lot of people are familiar with that term, but we just call it East Turkestan. And so it's believed to be that the Uyghurs are the first known Turkic-speaking language people and Turkic nation within the world. And then from then it kind of just dissects down to, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and then finally ends with Turkey and the Turks. And so I'm not as educated on their affiliation with other Turkic nations or with the Ottoman Empire, but they've been around for the longest time than any other Turkic group.
Right. And when we start talking about the nations, it's kind of a arbitrary way to think of it anyway, right? Especially in that part of the world where a lot of it's kind of tribal confederations and different groups that, because you've got things like the Huns, you've got the Mongols, and a lot of the time those aren't even talking about ethnic groups specifically.
Yes.
You've got a group of Asian, you've got Turkic, you've got all these things mixed into one, and you've got various times where that people group kind of rises, becomes the center of world history for a while, and then just kind of leaves as fast as they came. And have you ever listened to Hardcore History?
Hardcore History? No, I haven't.
There's a really interesting episode called Wrath of the Khans, which is about Genghis Khan and the empire there. It's a fascinating part of history that no one really talks about, ever.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like a lot of people are more focused on not current political events, but past political events. And so what I've noticed is that a lot of people don't associate Turkey with other Turkic nations. And they believe to be, like, whenever people do mention the Ottoman Empire, right, like, it was controversial. Not a lot of people like to talk about it, considering the Armenian genocide along with that too. But what a lot of people don't focus on is the Ottoman Empire's past history, so before the Armenian genocide, before the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And there's, like you said, a lot of history that's still left to be like found out. And what a lot of people are focusing on right now is like the Turkish TV show Diriliş Ertuğrul. It has gained a lot of recognition from the Arab nation, the Arab world, the international world, and now they have the Diriliş Ertuğrul in different subtitles and different languages, and it's just gained a lot of recognition because people want to learn about that history. They want to know what's left to be known, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Turkic cultures have had this really central role in world history for a really long period of time. I mean, from really till, say, 500 AD until really the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It's not to say there's not important contributions now, but it's this central world power for a really long time. So it's something people should learn much more about.
Yes, most definitely. Even looking at the spread of the Ottoman Empire to going into Europe, going into North Africa, going way into the Middle East. I mean, it's preoccupied a lot of those lands. And what a lot of people don't realize is that interfaith gatherings actually started within the Ottoman Empire, because what a lot of people think, or extremists, we could say, think, is that, the Ottoman Empire tried to impose Islamic traditions, Islamic values on people, on Christians, on Jews, on people from different religious backgrounds. And that certainly is not true. I mean, in my perspective, within the Ottoman Empire, there were a lot of people living within their own religious backgrounds together. And I believe the first interfaith gatherings have started there and has taught us, we're all brothers and sisters no matter what.
I think you, for the most part, you're right. Now, what I've learned from reading Islamic history is that there are seasons of persecution, and those did happen before and during the Ottoman Empire. But it's not necessarily like the normal thing. So I think the worst persecution of Christians in the Ottoman Empire happens really in the 100 years before it collapsed, and that's politics becomes this fuel in the fire of that. So it's not so much that you have Islamic leaders who dislike minorities that disagree with them. It's that it's twofold. One is the conflicts with Western powers and the fear in the Ottoman Empire is that these Armenians who are Christians are then going to ally with the Ottomans and then sink their government. And the other thing that's a little more widely spread, which happens more in North Africa, is that one thing I think people miss a lot in this culture is actually it can be a huge advantage to be a minority, because if you're in a minority culture, you kind of know the things you need to survive, and you tend to band together in a small group of people to kind of make that happen. And sometimes people in majority cultures don't have that. So time and time again, what happens is the people who are facing poverty, a minority group is doing slightly better than everyone else. And then some nefarious character that says, well, the reason you guys are poor is because the minorities are stealing all your stuff. And, well, we need to bring about justice by taking away from minority and giving it to the rest of us. And that's usually the fuel for persecution. It's rarely driven by a specific religious dogma, although certain schools of thought can certainly amplify it. But it's usually good old-fashioned resentment of what other people have and you don't.
Yes, most definitely. And I can see the banding of people even today, right now, too. I mean, with the Muslim world, for instance, with what's going on with the Uighurs or what's going on in India, a lot of the Muslims are teaming up or getting closer together. I was reading this research paper online about how Muslims have this strong connection towards one another because of the genocides or the political conflicts that are imposed against them. And definitely I see that happening now. I mean, I saw it happening reading through our past history in America too, with Martin Luther King Jr. or with Malcolm X, I can see the banding of those people occur much more often. But yes, I agree with your point.
So let's get into the specifics of what's happening in China. So right now, you said 1 million people in concentration camps?
Yes, according to BBC, The Washington Post, there's an estimate of 1 million people. There might be more and more people are saying there's over 1 million. There's about 3 million. It's uncertain, I would say, because, I mean, access to the camps are kind of impossible right now. I mean, even traveling to China, there was a documentary that these two girls have taken. It was done by Vice, and they actually went into China, and they were unable to find out much about the camps. They went into the Xinjiang region, but again, it was heavily surveillanced, and it was a little hard for them. But yes, an estimate that a lot of news outlets are giving is 1 million.
That doesn't surprise me. I went to China about a year ago, and the airport security was just crazy there, and it seemed like they were just controlling people for the sake of controlling people. I got there, and there was this police officer, airport security guy, yelling at this guy in English, saying, "You've been caught trying to get into China before. I don't want to ever see you in this airport ever again. Get out."
Oh my goodness.
And then we just had a layover there, so we just wanted to go out see Shanghai for the day, and there's a short-term, up to 2-day visitor visa, basically, that you get on arrival, and there was this really long line to get in, and it was moving so slowly. There was really elderly gentleman processing people as slow as he possibly could, and then the young angry guy came back, and then he started going through the line saying, show me your itinerary. Look at their tickets. It says, you're only here for 9 hours. That's not long enough. You have to stay in the airport. 13 hours. That's not long enough. You have to stay in the airport. Then he got to, everyone in front of us, he sent back and he said, 12 hours. He said, that's not really long enough, but I want the baby to be able to rest. You can come in. So having the baby got us in. So I've just had this small taste of this totalitarian system that's there. So when you say concentration camps, like what specifically do you mean? Because for me, when I hear that word, I have a huge range of things. All of them bad, but some of them being Auschwitz, and others being work camps or like prisoner of war camps. So there's a whole range of different things. So what exactly is it that's happening?
Yeah, so while a lot of people, when we hear concentration camps, we do think of Auschwitz, we do think of the German Nazi-style concentration camps. And basically right now what the Chinese Communist Party is doing is that they relabeled these concentration camps as re-education centers. And so they're choosing a limited amount of footage to show to the public. I mean, kind of like what North Korea was doing back when a lot of political conflicts were going on, and the rest of the world wanted to know like what was going on in there. I believe that the Chinese Communist Party is copying from that too right now. So they're only showing what they want the world to see. And so basically with these concentration camps, I can explain a little bit about what's going on in the camps, and this is basically the thing that gave it its name, concentration camps, because I see that it's no different than what happened in Nazi-style Germany back then. And so Darren Byler, who's an Uyghur scholar, he has given a number of events here in Washington State, and he's actually traveled to the Xinjiang province and explained, from testimonies that he got from Kazakh Turks and Uyghur Turks on what's going on there. And so basically it's a 16 square foot area where about 20 to 40 people are living inside of or have to stay inside of, and it's heavily surveillanced. Uyghurs are not allowed to speak their traditional language. If they're caught praying, if they're caught reading the Quran, if they're caught doing anything religious, then they will immediately get punished. I believe they're only allowed a certain number of meals a day. They can only urinate into buckets, so they're not even allowed to go to the bathroom, not that they have bathrooms in the camps. And a lot of the children that are taken from them are sent to orphanages. TikTok, which is a popular social media outlet, it has released a couple of videos of Uyghur children in these orphanages, and nobody knows whether or not those videos are real, but it was horrifying to see that for a lot of viewers. And so basically from the articles that I've written in, I dedicated a whole article on Uyghur women and the women in the camps, and I've gathered a lot of testimonies online that I found, and one of the women explained that they would have to stick their arms through a hole and they would get injected with a needle. And after they got injected with that needle, they noticed that they would lose their periods. Another testimony that I found from this man, his wife was injected by a needle while she was pregnant, and after the baby was born, it was already dead. And a lot of these things are kind of piling up in the testimonies, and having a close friend of mine be affected by the camps. Her mother, my friend's name is Olivia Akida, and her mother is Rahila Dawood. She's an anthropologist, and she has been missing since the end of 2017, and nobody has heard a word from her since. She's a university professor in Xinjiang, and none of her students have heard from her, and she's missing till this day. And so even outside of the camps, there's a lot of brutality that's going on. You know, we're seeing leaked pictures of women who want to dress modestly but have to dress more Western. And there's posters that Darren Byler have showed in his presentations that specifically show the Chinese government putting a no sign on like the hijab or the crescent and the moon, which is oftentimes found on Islamic flags. And so a lot of these things are kind of, as they pile up together, they do give me the vibe of, you know, a concentration camp. And there's no other way to put it, because even looking at new articles coming out saying that, you know, China is trying to rewrite the Quran. Like, who are they to touch a religious holy book that is important to over 1 billion people and rewrite it just to fit into China's new formed country? So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to shape the country so it abides by the Chinese Communist Party's laws.
Right, right. It seems very similar to the Soviet Gulag system back in the Stalin and beyond sort of era. And in reality, right, that if we're hearing these stories now, the reality is probably worse, not better.
Most definitely. I mean, just hearing the testimonies, I was part of hosting an Uyghur event back in December, and some of my Uyghur friends came down to explain what was happening in these camps, and they know much more other Uyghurs who have fled to Turkey. So what a lot of Uyghurs are doing is they're fleeing to Turkey and they're residing there right now. And so a lot of the testimonies or a lot of the experiences that I'm hearing are girls are getting raped, they're being taken out of their cells, they're not being allowed to go back into the cells, nobody hears from them again. And just from 1 million Uyghurs already missing and us not knowing any information about them, no international attention is being shown onto them, this is much more than re-education centers. These are concentration camps.
Question, what is the overall Uyghur population?
The overall population, I think it's about, I mean, it probably changed. I know that in Turkey it's over a couple thousand right now of Uyghurs living there. They're kind of spread around the Uyghur nations too. I believe in East Turkestan, it's more than the size of California, Texas, Washington. And so I believe it's about maybe 10 million.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Okay, so if we're saying if we've got 10 million here, then that's roughly 10% of the population interned in camps right now. So are you familiar with how people actually get in at this point? Like, what is the metric the Chinese government is using to say, right, off you go? What's actually, how does an individual get put in that?
So within East Turkestan already, I mean, within the mosques too, they're under heavy surveillance. And from what I learned from Darren Byler and Bill Clark, he's the Northwest Peace Catalyst regional director. He's also lived within East Turkestan and knows about the Uyghurs. And so what a tactic the Chinese Communist Party is using is that they're heavily surveillancing mosques and areas that they know that Uyghurs pass by in. And so if they see an Uyghur with a hijab, or if they see an Uyghur going into the mosques to pray, or if they see Uyghurs speaking up against the Chinese Communist Party, or even during our holy month, Ramadan, where we fast for 30 days, if they catch them not eating or fasting, then that's automatically a way that you can get into the concentration camps. But I mean, with a lot of Uyghurs here who are outside of China right now, with their uncles, with their relatives, with their families already being in the camps, like it's as if they hear about them one day and then they don't the next day. So I don't know how the Chinese Communist Party takes them directly into the camps if they just go to their house, hunt them down, and arrest them, or worse.
So how much is this a solely straight out from the government thing versus how many people are kind of turning their neighbors in?
So with China, I mean, it's a humongous country. Actually, most of Chinese citizens don't know about these camps and don't know that this is going on because of the lack of media recognition the Chinese allowing to get to the rest of China.
Right.
And so I believe that, it's a lot with the surveillance. It's a lot about the military or the Chinese Communist Party control that they have over East Turkestan. That's how they probably get to, they might have a list, of the people who they're tracking down or the people who they know are against the Chinese Communist Party's values. But even with, for instance, Rahila Davut, who is Olivia Akida's mother, she was a good citizen. And of course, she would never do anything against the government, against the party, but yet she was still detained and we don't know of her until now.
Right. So it's a metric of detaining people that doesn't necessarily have a legal precedent in place. It's something they're just kind of making up as they go along under the premise of, okay, we're here to stop extremism. We don't want the East Turkestan region to become like Syria, and therefore we're going to do this, and this to contain the situation and protect it. And that seems to be more or less the justification the Chinese government is using.
Yes, and to me, this is both a religious and an ethnic conflict, because looking at the multiple people who have visited East Turkestan, when you do go to East Turkestan, you do still see Uyghur influence there, Uyghur culture there. You still see the traditional dances, you still see the clothes being sold, you still see the traditional food being sold in vendors out on the streets. And so I feel that they're trying to advertise Uyghur culture within that region to invite more people over there to replace the people that they put into the concentration camps, and to kind of hide away that, that there are camps. So they're still allowing people to go within that region, but it's really North Korea kind of influenced.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the confusing things about anything with China is that people's experiences are not the same all over the country. Like I run into this with Christians in China as well. Where I have some people from, say, Chengdu who face immense persecution. There's a guy there's a pastor called Wang Yi right now who's just in jail indefinitely for attempts to subvert political power kind of charges. And then you have other friends from, say, Shanghai or somewhere else where they've never had a problem with the government being a Christian in their life. And they've been free, they've been able to access things. But then in other areas, you've had intense persecution as well. And it seems like what's uniquely difficult about this is that to live freely as a Muslim, there's almost more visible signs that people tend to kind of live with, right? So you kind of have a hijab, men might have a beard. Not everybody, but some people want to express their faith through that. Whereas, so people who are on the watch for religious extremists will more easily spot a Uyghur Muslim than they will a Chinese Christian, who wouldn't have any cultural things that would make them look any different to the average Chinese government official. Only if they hear their rhetoric of there's only one God, there's one king over the nations, and it's not Xi Jinping, right? That's the thing that is likely to get them in trouble or associations with people. Whereas it seems with this Uyghur situation, the Chinese government just sees he has a beard, she has a hijab, extremists.
Most definitely. And like, of course, I can't speak for all of China due to the size and the different regions and the politics. But within just East Turkestan, I mean, a lot of people have been forced to come out of the hijab. And, you know, a lot of people look like normal, regular citizens. And there's a lot of past Uyghur detainees who did look like normal citizens, but they were still detained for that reason. And so a lot of people who were able to get out of the camps, you know, describe this. And these are innocent people that we're talking about. And it's not just being Muslim, it's something else that's causing the Chinese Communist Party to detain all of these people, because within those 1 million Uyghurs, not all of them are Muslim.
Right.
Not all of them are Uyghurs. Some of them are Kazakhs. Some of them are from different Turkic nations. Some of them are from different ethnic groups. And, you know, when we look at the Han Muslims, for instance, you know, that's completely different too. I mean, think about the thousands of Muslim tourists who go to China. I mean, are they each individually detained for being Muslim? There's something else. There's definitely something else.
So why do you think China is doing this?
Detaining Uyghurs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's not just China that's doing this. It's specifically the Chinese Communist Party, because I have spoken to Chinese students who have come over here for study abroad and who have joined us for these Uyghur events, and they were shocked. And members of the Chinese church over here, they were shocked to see that this was happening, because they didn't know. Even being in America, there's still a lack of information going to us, going to people. Even with the Chinese students who have come from China, it's a lot of lack of media recognition. And so I specifically blame the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping for this. And I think that the Chinese Communist Party is doing this because they want authoritarian power. They want authoritarian power over East Turkestan. They want to impose Chinese Communist Party values onto that region specifically, so then they can take over the rest of China and impose this on them as well. And so by erasing or kind of transitioning these individual Uyghurs into Chinese Communist Party lovers and citizens, it's a way for them to impose it to the rest of China. And even looking at documentaries such as I mentioned, Vice, they have taken individual videos of some of the Chinese schools, and the kids were being taught to say things such as, "What are you? We're Chinese. Who do you love? The Chinese Communist Party," things such as that. And, you know, this is a tactic that they're using. They're taking children away from their parents and putting them into these orphanages, putting them into these Chinese schools to teach them, you know, that they're Chinese and not Uyghur. So erasing their cultural background, their religious background. And as for the East Turkestan currently still advertising Uyghur culture, that's another tactic that they're using to make foreigners believe that, you know, there are no Chinese concentration camps.
Right. It's the same cycle of communist ideology, just circles around and around and around again, and that they want to impose it on everyone. But it's interesting what you said, because that kind of fundamentally changed the way I think about this. Honestly, I was thinking about this as they've already imposed this everywhere else, and now they're trying to impose it on this region. But what you're saying is that you ain't seen nothing yet, that this is the beachhead for what they're trying to do everywhere else.
Most definitely. I mean, they have to start somewhere. And so they're going to start off with a region in which they know that they can immediately take power over. Because if they were to take power over different regions of China, I don't think it would work as much as, them doing it to East Turkestan right now. And so they've already mastered this. I mean, in 2016, when Xi Jinping was elected as the Chinese Communist Party leader, the hate crimes against the Uyghurs were still going on much before that. And of course, it wasn't as popularly advertised, or not as research papers were written by scholars back then. But a lot of these hate crimes are starting to be brought up now, and they're much more evident through places such as academia or through Uyghur scholars that you can find online, such as Darren Byler, as I mentioned, or Uyghur activists. And so, yes, I think that they're starting from one place so that they can spread it around to other.
And this seems pretty sinister, because from what I've heard, this is the worst government crackdown since the Cultural Revolution, when the communists came to power in China. So I believe it's 40 to 60 million people killed when that happened the first time. And then they changed the system in 1995 to what they call market socialism, I believe is the term they use for it, which for them basically meant, well, we have a free market, but you still have to obey the government unquestioningly. It seems to be they've kept all the worst parts of communism without any of the noble pretenses of equality behind it. So it seems like it moderated out for a while, and now under Xi Jinping, you've got these ideals coming around again, and now people are starting to experience the consequences of this through persecution.
Yes. And I believe that, a tactic that the Chinese Communist Party is using is religion and, wanting to rewrite the Quran, especially with that, and saying that, Uyghurs can't dress in the way that, Muslims would regularly dress according to Quranic verses. That's just a way that they're using to turn it against them and say, like, oh, because they're Muslim, and oh, because, these are their beliefs, this makes them bad. And this is completely inhumane and unjust. And I believe that, with Xi Jinping, I know that, he thinks that this won't have consequences in the future, but he wants to start off small. And so if he can take over the entire region of East Turkestan, and make each an individual Uyghur believe that, they're Chinese and not Uyghur, then that's just a way of taking over the Chinese Communist Party, taking over China as a whole.
Right. Having this renewed takeover, because they technically already have some kind of control.
Yeah.
And this is something that they've been doing for a long time with Christians, because I don't know if they've actually tried to rewrite the Bible, but they have official state churches where any teaching has to be approved by the state, and you have to make sure that you're not violating any state principles in order to say what you want. So all this is happening. One more question I have, as far as like the actual mechanics of the camp. Do people ever come out? Is it like you get a 15-year sentence, you get a 2-year sentence, or is it once you agree verbally to everything we're saying and we're sure you agree, you can leave again? Or how is this actually working? Do we just not know?
Oh, so like actually released by the camps.
Yeah.
So like not actually running away from the camps.
Yeah.
Because right now a lot of people are fleeing from China or fleeing from the camps. That's how we're getting the testimonies of what are happening within the camps, because there might be way worse things happening right now, but we just don't know because we don't have access to it. But I did see this one man who got out who was released from the camps, but he was mentally displaced and physically displaced, and he wasn't able to move or function his body in the right ways. I don't even think he was able to feed himself. So it's really a lack of medical assistance being offered to these camps as well, of course, since it's in the place of concentration camps and not re-education centers. And so I think that after a while, if the Chinese Communist Party does believe that the detainee has been under the influence of, I am Chinese, I am a supporter of the Communist Party, and I love Xi Jinping, and I'm going to abide by their values, then I think that's one way of them being released.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as people actually being released from the camps, I don't know of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to figure out what's actually going on at this point, because often you don't know until it's over with a lot of this. Have you ever read the Gulag Archipelago?
No.
It's a book by a guy who's in the... You should 100% read it, because it's a fascinating book, but it's by a guy called Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he kind of explained the whole Russian system of that, and he got locked up in there for, I think, 15, 20 years, and explaining how it all worked is horrifying and also fascinating, and I bet you it would shed light on the current situation, because the worldview behind it is pretty much exactly the same worldview as it was in Stalinist Russia to Xi Jinping's China in a lot of ways.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, as the Stalin era hopefully has ended, I mean, the last time I did visit Russia, I saw the heavily cultural influences from the Soviet Union. And, they were still under... Not that the people were under that mindset, of course, but, the leaders and the officials that worked for the government were still under that mindset. I mean, it was still kind of a tense situation, just going in there as a Muslim, first of all, and then just being there and experiencing it from, like, a cultural aspect. I mean, of course, with Russia, it has changed a lot, too, with the war in Chechnya and the different ethnic and religious groups coming within Russia. But as for China, they're not allowing that. And so that's the one main difference that I'm seeing in between those two countries as well, is that the Chinese Communist Party wants one thing, and that's to have supporters of the Communist Party, no religion, no ethnic groups other than Chinese.
Right. So that's the situation on the ground. We don't know how bad it is, but it's bad. Even if they're locking them up, feeding them perfectly and letting them shower, even if they had all the amenities, right? 1 million people locked up for something that's not a crime is a problem.
Of course.
So regardless of which of the stories are true or untrue, something really, 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 really bad is happening.
Of course.
So what are the practical things that people outside of China can actually do about this?
Yes, so a lot of things have been happening in the works. I mean, even within the United States, we have some congressional bills such as H.R. 649 or Senate Bill 178. I believe Senate Bill 178 is the one that will help us out the most right now. We're urging, through Uighur events and through our protests, we urged a lot of people to call our senators Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell to acknowledge this bill and help it get through passing and not let this bill die. But there's a lot of outlets that people can go to as resources. And, there's Uyghur Aid, for instance, on YouTube, and it offers over 300 testimonies that Uyghurs are giving for their families or for their uncles or for their friend, mother, father, brother who has been missing since the official concentration camps have been internationally recognized. And so a lot of these things are really helpful for a lot of Uyghurs. My friend Olivia Akida, she opened up a website called freemymom.org, and she has a petition on there. She has information about her mother on there, and she has other resources on how to help the Uyghurs and help urge the Chinese Communist Party to release her.
All right. And then what about, can people in China actually do anything about this?
People in China, I mean, one of the main reasons that people are being detained is basically if you're against the Chinese Communist Party or if you're against their ideals, then it's a reason for you to be arrested. And so I believe that with the rest of China not actually knowing what's going on within China, and for people traveling to China to see if there's any way that they can get access to the camps or to Uyghurs or to even get more information on what's happening, it's really heavily surveillanced, and it's really hard for people within China to do much about it. it's attention and recognition from leaders, from powerful leaders that we need right now that will ultimately influence China to stop what they're doing.
Right. It seems like a difficult task because China is such a huge source of goods, and
of course,
it seems like a risk to the world economy to turn to China and say, "Hey, we don't want anything to do with you."
Of course.
I mean, both for our economy, but also for their economy, but also that's the difficult thing about dealing with ideologues, because if you turn to North Korea and said no more camps, then they don't do that. It doesn't matter how many sanctions you have; it doesn't happen. So it's so difficult because, like, a war with China sounds like a terrible idea. I mean,
it would be horrible.
Awful, and no one should want that or hope for that or do that. And then, just the advocacy stuff makes a ton of sense, but also there's unique challenges to that as well, because if the sanctions don't work, China gets poorer. It'll probably make the situation worse on some ways as well.
Of course. I mean, with China, we're dependent on them. They're dependent on us. And if we were to break one of those ties, then it would just make the situation much more worse. And a lot of our things come from China. I mean, I know my pants are from China. And, with a lot of these things, and with the news article that just came out too, with Nike using Uighur factory workers to make some of those shoes and import them here, it's really shocking. And, there's just nothing that we can do about it from here other than advocacy. And with the congressional bills that are alive right now, just advocating for those and making sure that those don't die, those are one of our top hits on how we can help the Uyghurs there. And as for the Uyghurs who are able to flee out of China and come here, that's just one of the reasons on how we can support them. There's people within Istanbul that sends money to Uyghurs there to start a new life away from the Chinese Communist Party, to start a new life that's full of peace and not religious persecution.
So it seems really one of the, while there are political things that could help, there may be personal things that could help. Ultimately, it seems like the biggest thing we're dealing with is the worldview of the people who are in power in China. And what are the things? So let's talk before we talk about how that changes. Let's talk about what that actually is. So, how familiar are you with the sort of communist ideology and the ideology that's in power in China right now?
With the Chinese communist ideology, I mean, just from looking at some of the leaked documents on their ideals within the camps and what they want within the country itself, I'm a little familiar on what they're expecting from the people. And so this would go into the citizens abiding by what the Chinese Communist Party wants, which is worship towards their structure of a party. And so basically what that is that, they're trying to remind the people of how powerful the Chinese Communist Party is, and that they want to control that region of East Turkestan because they want to remind the rest of China how powerful they are. And so that just kind of goes into a little bit of their ideals and beliefs. And with their structure, personally, I still am having a hard time understanding what they want as a country and what they want as a party and what the leader is trying to get at with this.
So I've studied a lot of sort of communist ideology, and kind of the basic argument with Marx early on is that the rich have stolen the resources of the workers. And there needs to be this global revolution where we seize the means of production and distribute things openly between the working people. So we have equality. Once we have equality, once the bourgeoisie have been taken down and they've been distributed among the people, then Earth will be perfect. We'll have good education. We'll have a good society. We'll have good healthcare. We'll have everything that we need. And so it's actually a very easy thing to sell when you're going through villages, right? So in the Soviet Union, in Ukraine, there were some people called the Kulaks. And the Kulaks were these farmers who had managed to succeed at farming. Because up until the Tsars, everyone was basically a serf in Russia, essentially a slave. They just worked the land, didn't own anything. And then eventually they got, about 50 years before this, they got their own property. And in that 50 years, some people had managed to take their land. They'd maybe build a house, succeeded, become good farmers, maybe even hire a couple people. And then the local communists would go to the village and say, these people here, they are successful because they're oppressors. They've stolen this wealth from you. And what should be theirs is, it should be yours. So it is your civic virtue to go and take it. You can take this, you can lock them in prison, you can rape their wives, you can take their stuff, all of that. And not only is it okay for you to do that, it's a civic good for do that. This is a way of bringing about justice by having the oppressors have revenge against the oppressed. And so what happens is they send all these people to these camps in Siberia where most of them die because Siberia is freezing. And guess what happens to the people that took their stuff and are now the farmers? They don't know how to make food as well as the people who had actually been succeeding. So 6 million Ukrainians died of starvation. So a big part of this worldview is there's a few elements that are relevant here. One is this idea of building this earthly utopia that's ushered in by the state. The other is that Marx taught that religion is the opiate of the masses. It's basically something that keeps everyone asleep so that it's this injustice that needs to be rid from society. So in the Soviet Union and in China, religious leaders will often put in these re-education camps as well, so that they wouldn't spread their ideals, so that the revolution would continue properly. And think about, just from a communist perspective, right? Forget all the human power and ego in there. Just from a communist perspective, the whole goal of communism is to build utopia on Earth. But it's an inherently atheist system. So China is an officially atheistic country. So think about what you said. At the very beginning of us having this conversation, you said, I'm not concerned about the consequences in this life. I'm concerned about the consequences in the afterlife. That is fundamentally diametrically opposed to a communist worldview. Because the whole idea is you fall in line to build this utopia here. If you're not with us, you're against us. And you're going to ruin it for the rest of us with your opiates that are clouding your thoughts. So anyone who has strong religious feelings, they have to do their best to get rid of. So then the other part of it is with the solution to all these things is by concentrating power in the hands of the state. And the state has to then become this huge, unquestioned authority which answers to everything. However, if you're talking to a Christian or a Muslim, that's just untenable in our worldview. You cannot have the state be the ultimate authority over everything. We believe that truth is objective, that God has revealed himself, and that that we will give an account for our lives, and that the ends do not justify the means, and humans have this innate dignity. The individual has innate dignity rather than this idea of the greater good, which communism does, right? That, well, if we have to kill 6 million people, but as a result we bring out utopia for everyone else, then that justifies it. That makes life as best as possible, right?
Because it justifies the upcoming people who will live in that utopia, who will have a better life than the ones who had to die for it. So it's kind of like sacrificing the people for a better outcome. But I definitely agree. I mean, even like, you know, in Islam, we're supposed to abide by, you know, our state's laws, our country's laws. But with the Chinese Communist Party, with the Uyghurs who are there and thinking, okay, but the Chinese Communist Party has violated so many of my religious beliefs and our human right beliefs, then why should I abide by them in that case? And that's how you know when you mix communism and religion together, it doesn't add up for that reason, because it's a violation of many religious and cultural and human right rules.
Right. But what's fascinating about this is most states have some freedom of religion clause in their constitution somewhere. Even China does. So not only are they violating the Bible's rules or Quranic rules, the government is actually violating their own laws at this point.
Of course.
To do these things. It reminds me of my friend Shorat, who's the Christian I was telling you about from Turkmenistan. And he was actually a lawyer. And and Turkmenistan was not a communist country at the time, but it still had this post-Soviet system to it. And so he held church services in Ashgabat, and the police would come, they'd put him on a train, and they'd send him back to his village. But the first stop, he'd just get out and walk back. And then eventually they kicked him out of his apartment, and then he took him to court, and they're outside the court. He says, look, you can't do this. Our constitution guarantees freedom of expression and freedom of religion, and you're breaking the law by doing this. And the police officer says to him, the government agent says to him, those laws that are written down, those are written for foreigners. For you, we could just kill you. We're just waiting for the order. Right? This does not apply to you. You just listen to the government. And that's kind of the way these things have always operated. It's this infection of... It's like this. The communist system says there is no God, there's nothing beyond this life. But it always, always, always results in the man in the top of that system kind of filling that God void in the culture. He thinks he's a god, he acts with godlike authority, and tries to be the supreme being for everything. I'm going to supply all your needs, I'm going to destroy everything that's evil, and it's a mess.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And thank you for educating me on that, because with the Communist Party especially, and communism in general, it's my first hands-down experience learning about that through what China is doing to the Uyghurs. And so I believe that, looking at this from a religious perspective and seeing what Xi Jinping is doing, it kind of makes me understand, because, what the majority of Uyghurs are that they are Muslim, and, some of them are practicing, some of them are not. And, in our religion, we see that, God is the most knowing, most merciful, most loving, and most forgiving. But with Xi Jinping, with imposing this Chinese Communist Party within East Turkestan, he's kind of trying to replace the image of God with himself to the Uyghurs in that sense. And that's how he's taking over the mindset of all of these people, because the Chinese Communist Party wants them to obey one thing, and it's not God, but it's them.
There's a story in the Bible where there's King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He builds this enormous golden statue of himself and signs a law that everyone in the kingdom has to bow down to it. and anyone who does not bow down to it gets thrown in this fire. And there's three Israelite men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who refuse to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar, and they're thrown in the fire as a result. They don't die; they're rescued from that situation. But it's a very common theme throughout history that men want to function as God. That's a condition of the human heart that we innately have this bent towards. I don't want God to be God over me. I want to be God over me. And when you give a person unlimited power, they just feed that thing that's already inside them that makes them want to control everything and everyone.
Of course. And they abuse it. They do. And I can give the example of what's happening in Turkey right now. And with Erdogan, his dictatorship, I mean, he has gained a lot of international recognition and support. He's gained a lot of support from Arab nations, from other countries, from other Turkic nations. And, he has all this power right now. And he's really smart. He's a smart person. And he knows how to utilize this power. And he's kind of making the image, he's showing himself off as a devout Muslim, while he's not, because he has violated so many Islamic laws and Turkish laws within its own constitution. And so with him, he's using his own image of being a good Muslim within the country of Turkey, and how he's helping so many countries, and how he's helping the Uighurs, how he's helping China with the coronavirus right now, sending Turkish aid over there. He's trying to give this image off to people that, he's a humanitarian, that he's saving all of these lives. And, behind closed scenes, it's not the truth. There are multiple people. There are over 800 children, according to the silence advocates of Turkey, who are within these detainment camps and jails with their mothers right now. There are multiple people who have fled to America away from the circumstances that he's imposed onto his people. And so there's definitely two perspectives of this. But, since he's already has all of this support from multiple nations, and since he's already imposed this image, this false image of himself, he's already manipulated and tricked people into thinking that, he is a leader. I heard this not one person, but I heard from multiple people that, he's going to be the leader of the Ottoman Empire again. And I questioned them and I say, what do you mean? The Ottoman Empire is no more. It's already failed. It's already down. We're just one nation right now. We like to call them one ummah. So all of the Muslims together, and they are so influenced by the idea of the Ottoman Empire, and so influenced by the image that Erdogan has put upon them, that they want that to bring up again, that they want that to be up again and running, yet they don't know the multiple conflicts that have led to the failing of the Ottoman Empire. There's a lot of false images going on about what a true leader, there's a lot of false miscontent about what a leader should be today. And, I can't even point to one good leader right now. Even with Bernie Sanders, he's one of our presidential candidates. Even with him, I know that he's not perfect. And, it's not about pointing out the faults of a leader. It's about what a leader should be to his people.
Yeah, right. And that's a good thought on where to kind of take this, because I guess what's happening with Erdogan is there's this vacuum in the center of the Islamic world that for 100 years now, I think it's the 100-year anniversary this year, there has been no caliphate. And even then, the Ottoman Empire did not function like a lot of the early caliphates, but still, the day that the office of the caliphate was abolished, there were protests all around the world. And there's this void of leadership that people are desperately looking to fill. So that Erdogan, no matter how sincere or insincere he is, he can now use that void to posture himself as, oh, look at me, I'm the protector of Muslims around the world. Mm-hmm. And especially as Saudi Arabia becomes less religious, right? When it starts to look more like Dubai than it used to 10 years ago, then that gives a great opportunity for someone like Erdogan to be like, oh, I'm gonna play the more religious cards, and it's a great avenue to influence and power in the Muslim world right now because of that void.
Of course, especially with the 2016 military coup attempt that occurred in Turkey. I mean, it was one of the main things that he used as an excuse to reach to the leadership, to the power that he has right now. You know, it's about blaming one marginalized group, which was the Hizmet organization at the time, to gain the power that he has right now. So saying that, you know, it's them that have those horrible beliefs or those false beliefs, or it's them who are traitors of, you know, Turkey, and it's them who we must, you know, put into those prisons, and, you know, that the rest of the world should not see. And that's how, you know, he manipulates people, because with the power that he has right now, if he says one thing, a lot of people will agree with him just because that they know, you know, he's a good leader, and, you know, everything that he say must be true. And, you know, he's led Turkey on to, you know, the successful country up until now. So we probably should abide by what he's saying.
Right. And it's the same sort of thing, although is going on in China, is that Xi Jinping can tolerate no kind of opposition, and you have this structure that kind of exists outside of him in the religion. And with like Hizmet, while technically it's the same religion as Erdogan, there's a very specific sort of leadership structure there that he innately sees as a threat and just can't tolerate existing around him. So anything to do with a coup d'etat, it's just immediately, okay, this is my opportunity to kind of move against this and get everyone out of the country.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, of course, Erdogan and Xi Jinping, like, they're not going to live on forever. They're human just like us. They will die one day. But it's the thing that, you know, when they are out of power too, who's going to take up after them? It's not about taking those leaders out of power right now. It's about what's going to follow after that. It's about the whole structure of the country. How are we going to fix that? And that's just one of the thoughts that have been preoccupying me. Even with the Chinese Communist Party, if they are held accountable for their human rights violations, how do we know that, you know, these hate crimes against Uyghurs are going to stop completely? They can't. It's impossible.
Right. So, in your view, what is the change needed for the future? Like, how like, you just as a Muslim, as an individual, how do you think that actually happens? Or do you think it won't?
I definitely believe that it will happen. Thinking about it from a religious perspective, I think a lot about the Day of Judgment. And I see, you know, these human rights violations. I see these genocides. I see these Christians and Muslims dying as a sign to us that, you know, the Day of Judgment is coming, and that God is sending these down to us so we can prepare as Muslims, as Christians, as just humans, to fix our ways and fix, you know, the unjust treatment that's going on towards our brothers and sisters, and to advocate for those. And so with me, like, personally, I believe that continuing to advocate for these human rights violations, continuing to educate people on what's going on in China, what's going on in India, Turkey, around the world, continuing to, you know, have Uyghur scholars, to have researchers, to fund these researchers, to have, you know, these types of events around in the community. I mean, even in Seattle, even in Tacoma, Bellevue, just along the Pacific Northwest, we have a large group of people who are willing to come to these events. It's just about educating people and telling people about it and spreading it amongst family and friends. And of course, advocating for the congressional bills too. There is something that we can do through our U.S. government, no matter, even if our U.S. government has violated against marginalized groups and issues. There is a way that, you know, we can utilize our U.S. government to help what's going on abroad.
Right. And yes, and the system here has been, while it's been abused at times, that the process of kind of law and due process and openness we have has allowed us to move past that in ways that can't happen here, right? So if you think about Japanese internment during the Second World War, while that's bad, that's concentration camps as well to an extent. Maybe not to the extent that things are happening in China, but it's bad. It's not having legal process. And we did that as a country. But through the ability to express ourselves, that's now widely looked down upon. Mm-hmm. Ronald Reagan officially apologized on behalf of the US government to Japanese Americans for that. And it's something we're able to move past. Whereas the Chinese system right now, because the government has to seem like God, they can't ever admit anything wrong. So you're still not allowed to talk about Tiananmen Square massacre that happened. That's still not something you can happen. If you talk about people dying in Tiananmen Square, then you get arrested for that.
Mm-hmm. Same in Turkey. If you talk about the 2016 military coup attempt, then immediately you're detained, you're arrested, or like you're put under the influence that, oh, this person might be a part of the Hizmet organization. We must detain them because they talked about this. And so a lot of these factors kind of building up to, it's just about what we can do in the US, because we're actually very privileged here. No matter the political issues that have went through us, no matter how many times, unjust treatment has been imposed onto marginalized groups that we know of here, we still have a privilege of using the power, the freedom of expression that we have here to help the ones abroad. And I think that's really important to highlight as Americans and just as people who live here.
Absolutely. So one thing I'm always curious about when I talk to Muslims about these things, and whether you think it will happen or not. Ideally, how would you want to see the world structured, right? So say you could have the Infinity Gauntlet from Avengers, and you could kind of snap your fingers and have global politics reordered the way you want. Would you have something like a caliphate which kind of protected all Muslims on Earth, or would you have independent nation states, city-states, global government? How would you want this to be? Like, would you want to see an independent East Turkestan? How would you hope to see the world?
Just like the whole entire world?
Yeah. But especially as it relates to this issue, right? Like, how do you think the world could be structured so that this wouldn't be happening?
Yeah, so first and foremost, with East Turkestan being its own region, I would want that to be independent, and I would want that to be internationally acknowledged by the Chinese Communist Party that these people live here. The majority of religion that they have over there is Islam, and, these people have been in camps. First, I want them to acknowledge that, the human right violations that they've committed. Secondly, I want the UN to finally hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what they've been doing right now. I want to see leaders acknowledging this right now. And, if Bernie Sanders is going to be our next president, I want him to acknowledge what's going on internationally, because it's not just about what's happening in America. If we have ties with China, they need to acknowledge that. And so right now, the structure of the world that needs to change is addressing human rights violations. And it's just not within East Turkestan. It's in Yemen, it's in Syria, it's in Turkey. It's in a lot of countries. And as Americans, we do have the mindset, a lot of people do have the mindset that, it's just about America. We just need to focus on ourselves. It's our military that are the saviors. It's our military that's protecting us from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or all of these terrorist organizations or these terrorist countries. And we need to step out of that mindset, and we need to realize that America is one big melting pot. And without those people migrating to America, we won't have a country like this. And so I believe just gaining international recognition through the US and through our president is what a leader should be like, not standing just with his people within the states, but standing with the world overall.
So that's things inside the US. So what do you think the transformation inside of China, right? What do you think the shift in ideas would have to be to make that kind of thing happen, right? Saying to East Turkestan, either you're actually an autonomous region or you can be your own nation state. Like what kind of attitude change do you think would need to happen in order for that to be the case in China?
Well, starting with that, within China, a lot of Chinese citizens don't know of not just about Uyghurs, but about other religions too, as much as, we would in America. And not saying that they aren't progressed, but speaking with a lot of Chinese students here and Chinese citizens, you know, the platform for them to be educated there is not the same as it would be in America. And so first, religious diversity needs to happen, cultural diversity needs to happen, access to those specific regions in East Turkestan needs to happen so other Chinese citizens can go travel in there. More mosques, more churches, more temples should be built or should be accessible for citizens to go to, because not all Chinese citizens are, you know, from a specific religion. They're really diverse. You know, there's Jews, Christians, Muslims, a whole range. And, you know, these needs to be accessible for the Chinese citizens within there. And so I believe freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of culture needs to be more acknowledged and more advertised there. And that needs to start with the leaders, because a lot of people are scared or shying away from what their leaders' viewpoints are of these specific religions and cultures. So more diversity essentially needs to occur within China.
And so, and the difficulty of saying that, right, is to do that, you would essentially have to abandon the Chinese communist worldview to get there. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge shift that needs to happen for that to ever happen. And I think it will one day, but this is exactly what they're scared of, right?
Of course.
This conversation here, this conversation around the world, this conversation among Chinese people is exactly why they're trying to lock people up, because ultimately their ideas are not compelling. They don't work. And they're trying to hold on to power and justify their bad ideas as long as they possibly can.
Of course.
And to do that, they need to shut people up. And they have to shut people up by locking them up in camps.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense to me with Xi Jinping's ideology too, because yes, he's able to maintain concentration camps right now in East Turkestan, but until what point? Until what point will he be caught, or will he be held accountable? You know, how is he so certain that, you know, these are going to keep on occurring within that region? How is he so certain that he's going to always have that power within that region, or within just China itself? I mean, aren't the people going to oppose this once they find out that there's Chinese concentration camps in East Turkestan? I mean, of course, they're going to oppose this. And being so certain that, you know, your power is going to stay with you for the rest of your life is a very dangerous ideology. And so holding him accountable first as a leader is the first step that the UN and international leaders among the world should take.
It's a very difficult place to step down from at this point. Because I think, again, this leads to the communist worldview. If there's no hell below us, above us only sky, right? If he can coast this long enough in his worldview, right, if he can keep this going, then he'll win. That he'll get away with this, that he'll get off scot-free ultimately. Right? He can probably propel this long enough to die a wealthy, happy man, ultimately. And it's difficult to see any path of like, hey, this is what we did, guys, that doesn't end with him in a jail cell. So there'd have to be a heart-level transformation where his whole view of reality shifts to say, oh gosh, what have I done?
Yes. And it does take people a long time to realize, you know, the mistakes that we made. Some sooner than later, but a lot of times with leaders who already have this power, already have this support within people who are already supporters of the Communist Party, you know, it's going to take a full reign of Chinese citizens to, you know, protest against him, fight against him, to make him realize, yes, what I'm doing is wrong. And then how long is my power going to stay with me?
But if you think even about that you need to have a wide worldview shift in Chinese thinking as well. So if you have an atheistic worldview, and this is not at all to say people who are atheists have no morals, but in a system which is survival of the fittest, which is all about making the world right, it's difficult to really give a justification for why something's right or wrong. So somebody might say to Xi Jinping, all these from my point of view, having all these people in camps is immoral. And Xi Jinping can say, well, from my point of view, this is necessary for the greater good of the country, doing the higher good. And there's ultimately no higher authority to dispute between those things. And in Chinese culture, while lots of people may feel like it's wrong, there's not really anything solid to stand on to be able to dig your heels in, push back and say, this is not right. And this is why this is not right. And I'm not moving anywhere. And the people who tend to be doing that in China tend to be Christians and Muslims, because there is something to actually stand against and say, yeah, actually, that's not actually a good thing.
Of course. Yes, that's a very good point, too, because oftentimes, you know, as humans in general, too, we stand by things that we can connect to, that we relate to, that's close to us. I mean, like, if there was a protest, for instance, for the prisons in Turkey right now, of course I would attend that because I can relate to it since I'm a Turkish citizen and because I'm from Turkey. But if there was a protest for camps that are going on in some place of the world, like, you know, just from like a human ideology, we would say, like, you know, oh, I don't know about these camps enough, so I probably shouldn't go to the protest because I'm not educated. So we're making up these excuses for ourselves too, in that sense, just from like a different viewpoint. We're making up excuses for ourselves to not educate ourselves about what's going on in that part of the world because we think that we can't contribute to a change. And so, yes, it will take a lot of people to protest against Xi Jinping until he realizes that, you know, his power is not going to stay with him. But it's just until we are able to have the concentration camps reach to the Chinese citizens for them to know that, you know, this is affecting China itself, and if the concentration camps continue to go on like this, it's going to affect the rest of China.
Right. So maybe one tangible thing people can do then is actually finding evidence and spreading it.
Yes.
And helping it get back to people, not in a way that's condemnation of like, how dare you as a Chinese person do this, not to make people ashamed, but to, hey, do you know this is going on?
Yeah.
Look into it.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, along with the evidence of these camps or what's going on in the camps or the testimonies, people are still a little bit iffy, right? So, like, they're thinking, like, you know, how can there be concentration camps right now? Or if there were concentration camps, then why hasn't anybody done anything about it? Let's think of China as a European country, for instance. Let's think of it as Germany today in 2020, or France, or just any part of Spain or any other European country. If it were to be in a European country, I most definitely believe that it would gain as much media recognition right now. It would gain the recognition of our President Trump for him to tweet about it. It would gain enough international recognition for them to support it and to have the UN ultimately put a stop to it. But no, since this is happening in China, and since China is halfway across the world to us right now, we can't do anything about it because we're not just educated on China. That's a lot of the mindsets that are going on right now.
So what has the response of the current administration been to this?
As of right now, I'm not educated on that. I don't know. If there was enough international recognition on it, we would know about it. But as far as that, there are nonprofit organizations working within the United States and outside of the United States to gain governmental recognition. We have our congressional bills too. Senate Bill 178, which I explained, I believe that's going to have the president report to Congress about Chinese government officials who are known to commit human rights violations about China. And so basically the president would just report back to Congress any Uyghur human rights violations that have occurred within China. And so that's one of the things that are going on right now that they're doing. But it's that we need to have the Senate bill passed.
Got it.
Yeah. And the last time I checked on it, I don't remember if it was HR 649 or Senate Bill 178, but it hasn't necessarily been touched on since December.
Yeah.
Or worked on since December.
Yeah. I saw that Pence mentioned the Uyghur crisis.
Mike Pence.
I don't think the president said nothing about it.
Yes, I know that Bernie Sanders has mentioned it, and a couple more American leaders have mentioned it. But other than that, nothing major has been done about it for them to go over to China and demand that, they release the 1 million estimated Uyghurs out of the camps.
Right. And then I guess the more the evidence spreads, the more incontrovertible it becomes, the more powerful measures like this become. Because, right now, people could say, they say, release the 1 million people you have in camps. And I'll just say, what 1 million people in camps?
Where?
We don't know what you're talking about. So the more specific it can become,
yes,
the easier it becomes,
of course,
for international pressure to be applied and to actually do something there.
Of course. And, even in Washington State, the most that I can advocate for is through Washington State, because I don't have congressional power to reach over to Congress and say, pass this bill. But giving the platform to Washington State Uyghur residents to testify within our state capital is just enough for it to reach to across the world. So one thing that I'm working on right now is with the Chinese Cultural Exchange Study Abroad program that UW is advertising a lot right now. So this is a study abroad program that is funded by its students, but I'm working through the state capital for UW to reconsider this exchange program, or to at least talk about it. Because if you think about it, if an Uyghur citizen who's a part of UW or just lives in Washington State, if they were to participate in this Chinese exchange program and go over to China, what would happen to them? We don't know. And then would UW be held accountable for their disappearance or for their detainment?
Yeah, hard to say. Well, there seem to be some tangible steps, right, to understand what's going on, to be able to articulate what's going on, and to advocate evidence being made public for people to understand and have access to that. Is there like a best sort of source on this that you can currently recommend?
To educate themselves on Uyghurs?
Yeah, to get the facts of what's exactly going on in China.
Yeah, of course. I would recommend everybody to read BBC's news article by John Sudworth. So BBC's team actually traveled to China and have gotten Google Map images of the camps, or where they estimate or where they suppose it might be. And so John Sudworth and his BBC team have went over testimonies done by Uyghurs, the estimated amount of Uyghurs within the camps, what the camps look like, what the structure of the camps are like, leaks by the Chinese government that they've seen in documents of how the camps are structured. And so that's definitely a really good introductory thing into what the Uyghurs are and what they're going through right now in China, and I would recommend everybody to read that. In addition to that, Darren Byler has written a research paper on the Uyghurs due to visiting China and having experience of being within there too, and these can all be found online definitely, and just reading into those can really offer people like a main introductory of who the Uyghurs are and what we need to do about them now.
Okay, well, I'll if you want to send me links to those things, and I can put them in the episode description.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for being here this week.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Al Maida Initiative podcast. We will be back next week.